I'm in the midst of a heated debate with myself over whether or not I should get rid of my big Wacom Cintiq drawing display. On one hand, the Cintiq is amazing. It has a huge drawing surface, and I have mine paired with the Wacom arm that allows me to move it around and position it perfectly. The drawing experience is great, and they even make these felt tip nibs, which I really love. And when I'm not drawing on it, it makes a decent display to supplement my MacBook Pro screen. So what's the problem, you might ask? Well, the problem is, I rarely use my Cintiq for drawing. I've convinced myself the iPad is better, and that if I replace the Cintiq with a dedicated, big, nice display, I won't miss it at all. At the moment, I'm all in on this argument. The problem is, I can't really trust myself. It sounds weird, but it's true. One way my ADHD really shows itself is in my impulsivity in regards to situations like this. Once I get an idea in my head, it's very hard for me to take a step back and be rational. My brain is very good at convincing me of nearly anything. It's a big reason why I was able to do that daily drawing project for over a decade. The good news is that I think I found a way to trick myself into being rational, and it's this video. By making a comparison of the two, I'll be forced to carefully consider the pros and cons of each. If all goes as planned, I will be able to make the right decision at the end of this video. So are you ready to help me be rational? Not make another rash decision and regret it a little bit later? You're probably just here for the review, so you know what? Let's get into it. So this is my Wacom Cintiq Pro 24 with the Wacom Flex arm, which lets me do all this kind of stuff and like go like that, which is pretty cool. Go like that. I can pretty much put it however I want and it'll stay in that position. It's pretty neat. You may have noticed I've switched back and forth between Wacom and Wacom. It's gonna keep happening. I said Wacom for a very long time, and then I met someone who actually knew better and told me that it was actually Wacom. So I try to do the new one. But Wacom sounds a little weird, and my life hasn't been built around. I've been saying Wacom for a very long time, so hard habits are hard to break. It's a hard habit to break. It's a hard habit to break. You know that song? Probably not. So this is actually my second 24-inch Wacom Cintiq. You may be asking, well, what happened to the other one? It's a funny story. I actually sold it because I found myself using an iPad all the time and not using the Cintiq. So I was like, oh, I don't need this. I'll just get rid of it because I only use the iPad. It was all fine and dandy until I ended up getting a project that involved me having to use Photoshop because there was some animation involved that required an actual timeline. It wasn't something that I could just do in Fresco or Procreate. Hooking the iPad up to the MacBook at the time was possible, but it wasn't as easy as it is now. The project ended up being a bit of a handful, and it forced me to go out and buy another Cintiq. So again, not an ideal financial decision because these things are pretty pricey. So as you can see, I made a rash decision. As you can see, I made a rash decision and then regretted it. This is a very common occurrence in my life. If you have ADHD, maybe you can relate to this. So it's hard for me to know if I actually think the drawing experience is better on the iPad or if I've convinced myself of that because I find it way more convenient. I love that the iPad gives me the ability to work anywhere. And what that mainly means is leaving my office and working on the couch. It's not that I don't like being in my office. I actually enjoy working in my office, but I don't like being limited to my office. I like to take my work with me. I like to be able to work all the time. I like to work when I'm sitting on the couch at night watching TV. And maybe it's not working. I just like to be drawing. The iPad just makes it so convenient. All my files are there. I don't need to hook it up to anything. It's just self-sustained. And I also love the drawing apps, like the mobile drawing apps. I feel like the drawing experience is better in those than it is in Photoshop, mainly because they're just purpose-built to be drawing apps. Now, I haven't compared them back to back in a very long time, so this could all just be some trickery in my brain. So we're going to do some comparisons in this video to see you know, if this is all really accurate. But in terms of size, there's no comparison. This is the 24-inch Cintiq. It's a big display, and this is my iPad Pro. This is the biggest iPad Pro. It's the 12.9, but you know, it's tiny compared to the Cintiq. So there is something to say about that. Another thing to consider is I think I'm getting some injuries from the way that I draw. And I think it might be related to the iPad. It's not something I want to admit because I'm convincing myself to like live the iPad life. But I think there's ways to make that less of an issue. So when I first started mainly working on an iPad, I was living in a different place and my office was downstairs and it just wasn't that convenient. And I found myself drawing from the couch upstairs nearly all the time. And where I was sitting on the couch didn't have an armrest. It was like a corner thing. And for some reason I sat in the corner. And because I wasn't supporting my elbow, I ended up getting some really bad tendinitis all in my arm and had to get like physical therapy because it hurts so bad. So I found out that it was a result of not anchoring my elbow enough and just always floating it, and it was straining all these different things. So now when I draw on the couch, I make sure that I have an armrest. But I think that armrest position has caused shoulder issues. So I guess you can't win. I think drawing is a very dangerous sport that we're doing here. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about becoming an illustrator. You may get some injuries. And this one here, I don't know what that's related to. Maybe it's because of this. It's all tied together. I didn't know we'd be talking about the danger of each. That said, if I drew on my iPad on my desk, I would likely take a lot of the strain off of my arm, put it on my back. But I feel like if I switched them up back and forth, there'd be less chance of some injuries. There's also that new product coming out by Astropad, which is like a desk type situation, handle case thing for the iPad that I backed on Kickstarter. So I'll be getting one of those too soon, which I'll review and see how that changes things. Because even if I decide at the end of this video to keep the Cintiq, there's no way I'm not gonna be still using my iPad for nearly everything because I just like it. I guess the decision will be if I'm gonna hold on to the Cintiq for when I have to do things in Photoshop and prefer the experience, the seamless experience of drawing on the display rather than hooking up my iPad via Astropad or natively through Apple's display options. All right, so I'm at my desk at the Cintiq. I got Photoshop turned on my MacBook Pro, which is over there that you can't see, but that's running the Cintiq because obviously the Cintiq is a display that you can also draw on. I got my glove on. I'm going to use my glove for both of these because it's very crucial to my drawing experience. Got my Wacom pencil. This is the one that came with it. I don't know if it's anything special. It doesn't look that way. This is just the default Wacom pencil. Can you see this smudge? I got a little smudge, a little smutch over here. I think my lens isn't going to allow the smuts to be visible, so we're just going to ignore it, pretend it's not there. So the good thing about this comparison is that I do nearly all of my drawing in Adobe Fresco, and Adobe Fresco uses Adobe Photoshop brushes. So I'm going to use one of my favorite brushes to draw with, which is called Kyle's Inkbox Too Smooth to Be Forgotten, which is one of Kyle Webster's brushes, which are all available for free in Photoshop or Fresco if you have the premium versions of those. So I'm just gonna do some test drawing. So the other thing to consider when using the Cintiq is that I have to have a keyboard over here so that I can do key commands to do things that I could just intuitively do on the iPad. So on the iPad, I could like zoom in, move the artboard around, select tools, make the brush bigger, all that stuff I can do on the screen. Here, I need to use the keyboard. So you need to be pretty fluent in certain key commands for this to work well for you. So like I'm constantly using the brackets to make the brush size bigger or smaller, and then holding the space bar to I gotta wake up my Bluetooth keyboard. Went to sleep. Okay, I'm back. I gotta get in here. Got a drawing. I got a document open. I'm gonna start drawing. I'm just making some lines. So one thing I will say is there's a little more resistance than there is on the iPad with the paper-like screen protector. I'm actually noticing that this felt nib looks like it might be in rough shape, which is surprising because I haven't used it that much. But I mentioned how much I like the felt nibs. I'm bringing them up again because these things wear down so fast. People worried about the iPad tips wearing down fast. These Cintiq felt nibs, super fast. Oh yeah, with a fresh felt tip nib, this feels really good. The Cintiq has a matte finish to it, so you don't need any sort of cover or anything to go with it. It's very smooth. I would say it's more of like a satin, if you will. It's very silky smooth. There's none of that like glass tackiness that you get with the iPad without a screen protector. I'm also just like constantly wanting to zoom in like this, but I can't do that with the Cintiq. I gotta go over to the keyboard over here, and you gotta zoom in. And it's not so bad, but I would love to just be able to move the artboard around a little bit. But what you can do is hold the space bar and it turns your pen into a hand so you can move it around like this. There's just a lot of keyboard interaction going on. So you gotta be pretty comfortable with that stuff. You also need to make sure that your setup has a place for your keyboard over here so that you can be keying over here, drawing over here. So we're drawing a skull. Not a good skull, but we're just doing it to just get a feel. So I got the skull here. Experience is pretty good. Feels great. Just doesn't feel as good. I don't think. I have to say the felt tip nib on the screen feels fantastic. It is superior. These felt tip nibs are amazing. It feels so much like a flare or a sign pen on paper. It's really good. It's a really good experience. So I guess drawing in Photoshop is pretty good. I guess it's better than I remember. I just like the streamlined version of either like the drawing apps made for the iPad, like Fresco and Procreate, just because they don't have any of this other stuff that Photoshop has that we don't need. Okay, so I don't think I'm gonna be able to demonstrate the quality comparison for you visually between the iPad screen and the Cintiq screen because of the lighting and reflection and all that stuff. Because when I film the iPad, I actually have to turn the brightness down so that it appears okay in footage. So you're just gonna have to trust me here. So I have the same image up on both of the screens. Same file, same everything up on the Cintiq and on the iPad. So I guess the first thing I would say is that the iPad Pro is a Retina display. The Cintiq is not. So when I'm looking at the same image zoomed in about the same amount, I'm actually zoomed in further on the iPad and it's just perfect, crystal clear. And I'm not even zoomed in as much here, but it's a lot more pixelated. So it's not just that I'm zoomed in so I'm getting to see more detail. Like I can see individual pixels on the Cintiq display. So yeah, there's a lot of pixels. I picked this file because there's subtle changes in color and there's a lot of texture, and I thought texture might be a good way to tell about the pixel density. But I can see the pixels easily. This is very pixelated on the Cintiq. It looks fantastic on the iPad. Did I already say that? It does. So I find the color on Apple displays to be pretty spot on. That's what I would trust if I was getting something printed and wanted to make sure it looked close. I trust my Apple displays over other displays. So the color on the Cintiq is pretty good, but it's definitely warmer. There's more red. It's a little more saturated overall. What we're gonna do now is I'm gonna do some quick back and forth where I draw on the iPad and then I draw on the Cintiq. And I'm gonna just keep switching back and forth so that I can get a real feel for the difference between the two. All right, ready? iPad. Using the same size file, I'm using the same brush, Too Smooth to Be Forgotten, Kyle Webster, and same size document. And I'm just drawing, feels pretty good. Feels a little slippy, a little smoother, a little less resistance than I felt when I was drawing on the Cintiq a minute ago. I am noticing just how crisp and tight the screen quality is now that I'm drawing on the iPad, and that's something that I really enjoy. It's just perfect. I zoom in and it's just immaculate. Okay, we're gonna switch. We're gonna go back. Okay, so I'm over here. Okay. So there's a little more drag, a little more resistance, but it also feels like not as smooth. It's almost like there's a little bit of a, not like a paper grit, but just like, I guess it's the felt nib. So I like the way it slides, but it's flexy. So there's obviously no flex in the Apple Pencil nib. And I like that flex, I think. So I like the way it slides. I don't think there's something that would make me happy, to be honest with you. All right, back. We're gonna go back. We're gonna switch back. Yeah, so I think the Paperlike does enough to give me that resistance, but I like how firm the Apple Pencil tip is. I think it's just the Paperlike is all you need, because I like the way this feels. It could be that I'm just really used to it, but I like that I can just be going like this back and forth, and I don't get that little bit of, it's like almost a cringy feeling. Not cringy, but like almost like chalkboard feeling, if you will. It's not, but it feels like you're in a tiny little car and you're running over a tiny little person. Just minuscule though. Minuscule person. So I don't feel too bad about it. All right, back. Going back. Go back. Yeah. I like the iPad drawing experience better. But sometimes I have to work in Photoshop, as I said, so we're gonna have to hook it up both natively with Apple and also through Astropad, because that's a different experience. Okay, so I have my iPad hooked up to my MacBook Pro with Astropad right now. With Astropad, you can control how much of the screen you get mirrored on the iPad. The reason for that is if you wanted to do your full screen, the aspect ratios are different between the iPad Pro and the MacBook, so you get like a black bar at the top and bottom of your iPad screen. And everything is pretty small. So what you can do is select what you want to mirror. So I've selected an area that has a little bit of margin on the sides in Photoshop, and then I figure I'll pull my toolbar into it. So then when I look at my iPad and Astropad, I've got my toolbar here in Photoshop, and now I have full control and I'm able to zoom in and out with my fingers, which is pretty neat. And I've got my tools. The only thing that's a little bit annoying is to access my other windows, like my layers and stuff like that. If they're not in the frame, I can't really do it, but I can drag them in, and that's fine. So you can sort of control it that way. You can also sort of treat it like it's an external display over there, so you've got extra real estate, so you can just be like clicking over there. So, I mean, it's not that different than if you were using a Cintiq and you had some tools on like your other screen or something like that. All right, so let's check the drawing experience. I have the iPad connected to the MacBook via USB-C, but you can also do it wirelessly. This will give you like the fastest results. So I'm gonna see if there's any lag or anything like that. I used Astropad a long time ago, but I haven't used it since. So we'll compare how this is versus just using the iPad as an extra display, which you can do through Apple's own IS. So with Astropad, I'm just gonna draw in my document like I was doing before. There's no lag whatsoever. So you can change the display resolution, which is pretty cool. So it's set to Retina, but I guess if you were trying to use this without a cable and you wanted it to go faster, if there was lag, you could change it to non-Retina. And then you can also set function keys, I guess, to control things here, which would probably help with any, stuff that wasn't ideal to get to quickly. You could probably make functions for that, so that's pretty cool. Oh yeah, so there you can set up key commands, or not even key commands, just little buttons on the side, which is really cool. So like undo, redo, brush, eraser, zoom in, zoom out. So that's really cool. You can also zoom with your fingers, so I don't know why you'd want a zoom button there. But anyway, it looks like you can control them. There's also a button for like new layer, so you could just make a new layer over here, which is cool. So if you didn't have your layers palette open, but you just wanted to add a new layer, looks like you could easily just do that there. The other cool thing is there's a built-in keyboard that you can pop up. So if you didn't have an external keyboard or didn't want to use your MacBook keyboard for some reason, I don't know, maybe if you were using a desktop, I don't know, but you can open up a keyboard on your iPad, which is pretty cool. There's also quick keys down here like Shift, Control, Option, Command. Those are all helpful things. And then you can just move them around, which is cool. You can move them, decide which side they're on. We got magic gestures. One finger down and pencil drawing. So let's try that out. So if I put one finger down, oh yeah, cool. It just makes it an eraser. Right mouse button is 2 fingers down in pencil drawing. Oh, cool. So you get that little right click menu that way. Then modifier keys, 3 fingers down in pencil drawing. I guess you could set that to whatever. Right now it's the eyedropper. This is actually really cool. So it looks like you can customize this stuff. Yeah, we got tap, 1 finger tap, undo, redo, double Apple pencil tip. So this is really, really customizable. You can also set the shortcuts on the Apple Pencil, like by tapping here. I haven't used this in a long time. It looks like they've upgraded it quite a bit since then. The only time I'd really be using this is if I was doing some sort of like animation project. Like, I hesitate to say animation project, so I'm not an animator, but I do animated illustrations quite a bit, like looping animations. And every so often they're a little bit more complicated. Maybe there's like several states of morph, or I need to sync it to music or something like that. In those cases, I really need a full timeline as opposed to like what you can do in Fresco or even Procreate to a lesser extent. So if I was doing that, I can have my timeline on my MacBook Pro display, and then I would select my drawing area. So I could just work back and forth, and this would work pretty well. There wouldn't really be an issue with that. Let's try this using the native Apple way as opposed to Astropad, because Astropad does cost money. There is a standard version. I'll have to find out what that difference is and if it's free, because the studio version I think is like $8-ish a month. So something to consider. All right, I'm gonna switch. I'll be back. I've been messing around with the native Apple connection to use the iPad as display for several minutes here, and I'm not having an easy time. It's I feel like it should be easier, but it seems a little complicated. I mean, it's not complicated to connect, but there's a lot of features and a lot of control, and I'm struggling with it. So I see I'm using it as another display right now, but I lost my mouse. Oh, there's my mouse. I need to open up system preferences again and like control where things are, but like I don't see it. So it must be on this display, but I can't. All I see is Photoshop. It's not ideal. I don't know what's happening. I'm doing a hard unplug. Oh, it still works because it works over the network too. What do you think of that? Turned it off. Oh, no, it's back. What if we do a swipe through? I'm gonna do a swipe off. What if we turn off Sidecar? Okay, I turned off Sidecar. Okay, now I'm gonna do a replug in. We're gonna start fresh. Okay, so let's go to our displays. Display preferences here. I'm going to choose add a display, and I'm gonna choose my iPad. Oh no, not linked mouse, that was a thing. So we want to extend, mirror or extend. So now the iPad is mirroring the MacBook Pro screen. And we do have that black bar at the top and bottom because the aspect ratio is a little different, but we're gonna just try this as is first. Let's just see what this is like. Cannot use a brush tool because no layers are selected. So where are my layers? Okay, I've got our layers window. So the good thing about this setup is I've got the whole screen. It's just smaller. So I don't know if that's ideal. I think this wouldn't be ideal if I had like a timeline up and different little things because everything would be tiny. So I don't know how useful this is to try it, but let me just see if there's any lag or anything like that. So no, it works fine. I can zoom in, that works. The only thing that's weird is like that move at side, the moving it around action is wild. It's like very sensitive and I don't know why it does that. It's very easy to have it just go wild. Like, I just want to move this a little bit and it's just like, we're going everywhere. Like what? Look how little I'm moving my hand and look how wild my document is. Like you can barely see my hand moving. This is bonkers. I don't like that at all. This mirroring, unless I was just drawing in Photoshop just to draw, which I wouldn't do because I would use Fresco because I think it's a better experience. So I wouldn't do this. So we need to try it with using it as an external display. So I'm going to do that. I have my iPad set up as an external display to my MacBook Pro. So now Photoshop is a lot bigger. It's full screen on the iPad, which is good. Drawing feels just as good. Can zoom in, zoom out. So this is great. There's no problem here. This is a good experience. I think Astropad has a lot of really good features, and I'm probably going to keep using it to see how it could affect my workflow. This is good. This is really good. So you could use this perfectly without having to get Astropad Studio. But I think there are some really cool features in Astropad that might make the experience better overall. I would just have to decide if it's worth it because I don't work in Photoshop that much. Most of my work is 2D illustration, like not motion. And when it is motion, it's usually simple, like looping animation, and I can usually do that in Fresco. This Apple built-in display thing for the iPad wasn't an option back when I first switched over to the iPad and regretted it. Not regretted it for general use, but regretted it as a Cintiq replacement. It looks like there's like levels of undo here, which is really cool. There's buttons on here like Astropad. That was pretty cool. These are both great. They both work really well. It's not looking good for the Cintiq, I'm gonna be honest. I know this video was more for me than it was for you. As I mentioned, it's hard for me to trust myself. I get these ideas in my head and I just act on them. Make a decision, go with it, get all excited, think it's the best idea in the world, and oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's not. But I feel like after going through this video that I'm making the right decision. I'm gonna have a nice display, and that's what I mainly use the Cintiq for. And I love drawing on the iPad, so we're gonna do it. I don't know, do you wanna see me talk about my new setup with the new display? If you do, let me know in the comments. Also, leave a comment anyway. I love getting comments. Really love it. Okay. Hey, and while you're here, don't leave yet. Check out this other video of mine that YouTube has used robots to decide that would be the best one for you. Of my videos. Best of my videos for you. Next. Just click on it and watch it. I think you're gonna enjoy it. All right. Good talk.